Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their firsts. I'm your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you're an interesting person in IT, please do let us know. You might be the next first person. The next voice you will hear will be today's guest. He is David Jones. David is definitely one of the most interesting people in IT, a chief architect, CTO, and a CIO who describes what he does as elevating business technology strategy through architectural excellence. We are delighted to have him as a guest on First Person. So, David, welcome. And first up, what is the first thing people should know about you?
Well, it's really proud to be on the program, Matt. I think the first thing to know about me is I'm very honest person.
Excellent.
I try not to do politics. Okay, honesty and politics don't go together. Um, I do love collaborating with people. I have to say, and but I'm really like to focus on getting the job done and enjoying the experience.
Okay. Well, I mean, hopefully we will get the job done today, and you will enjoy this experience, and maybe our viewers and listeners will enjoy it too. Big fan of honesty. That's very helpful in an interview show. And yeah, we're going nowhere near politics. Trust me, that is that is definitely not something that we want to touch on today. Brilliant. Okay, so moving into our first section of the show, which we call First Things First, which is where we would like to get to know our guest by understanding some of their first time. So let's go right back to the beginning, if you don't mind, David, and tell us a little bit about your first job in IT. How did you get into this industry?
It was actually when I was in secondary school.
Huh.
So when I was 12 or 13, just as they as you start to decide what kind of subjects that you want to choose. In back then in our school, we didn't do computing.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah. Um and so I chose at that time to go and do a go to one of the tech colleges to while I was still at school to study computers because they were doing it as part of an electrical engineering course. And then as I was doing that, the school started to introduce it. So, and once I finished up in school, the teacher asked me back to actually help him run the class. So while I was still heading off to go to university and stuff, I still stayed on and helped the teachers then introduce computer studies. Um, and I remember sitting there formatting a lot of floppy disks for the BBC Micro.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. I also I've said this before on this show, but I was the editor of a PC magazine before I owned a PC, and I don't believe I ever used a computer ever at school. Like, it just didn't. It wasn't a thing we did. You know, even at university, I wrote essays by hand. There was a computer center you could go to, but you had to like book a slot to use it, which I think like people who are even maybe a short while younger than you and I, David, we sound like we're of a similar vintage would find kind of mind blowing, right? That because computers are so intrinsic to every part of our daily lives now, but even the fact that it was kind of a subject to be taught. But I'm really interested that what do you think it was that at the age of 12 or 13 intrigued you sufficiently that you went out and sought that opportunity outside of your normal schooling?
Yeah, I have to say it was my brother. He was electrical engineering, and he was taking me through some of the formulas of what he has to do. And I says there has to be a way
Yeah.
to to do that, you know. And and in parallel to that, very scientific, structured kind of thinking. I also had a pen pal in France at the time. And I was saying, I'd like to be able to write to that person, but I want to be able to do it in a kind of a structured way. And, rather my writing's awful and all that. And my brother says, well, why don't you learn? I think those computers are just coming out now. I think it was the ZX Spectrum, VIC 20, Commodore 64. He says, what?
Yeah.
Maybe ask mom to get one of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was basically trying to solve those two problems. I wanted to write to a pen pal I had in France, and I wanted to help my brother with his electronics formulas that he was dealing with.
It's so interesting to me how many times we talk to people who have been successful in IT and in technology, and their way in is it's something akin, a similar type of story, right? It's a curiosity and a desire to solve problems. And then the technology is not incidental, but it's kind of the framework within that which that happens, kind of thing. It's really interesting and quite satisfying to hear these stories like repeated, because that spark that lights a thousand fires, it tends to be quite similar. And so you're kind of in the industry because you're like, working in education in principle. I mean, I presume you then went to college to study something related. Would that be right?
Yes, as you know, Matt, in England at the time, I come from Liverpool. In England at the time, there was you do your O levels, your A levels, and then you go on to university. Sometimes if you don't do your A levels, you maybe go to college to do an equivalence. At the time, my family knew someone that was the head of Wang Systems at the time, over in Birkenhead, and so I contacted him and I says, "Look, which route should I go? A levels or should I go to college
Yeah,
before going to uni?" And his advice was, "Go to college.
yeah,
You'll be able to focus in on computer studies. You'll be able to get the practical element." As well as collect up some of the other subjects. And that's what I did. I went to college and, so I left school at 16, went to college till I was 18, and then on to do my BSc honors in computer science then after that.
amazing. Like again, the opportunity, but also the desire to reach out and ask for that advice and then to take it. Because, like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a book to be written about education and technology and IT specifically, because I think, it often feels like the academic teaching of the subject is somewhat behind what's happening in industry, kind of thing. And that your story kind of bears that out. And so having gone through all of that and the hands-on experience and the ability to focus, you then presumably went into the industry. And was that the first job post university? Did that feel like you fitted in? Did that feel like was that the first time you thought this was the industry for you?
Well, wasn't entirely sure at that point. I certainly was. I was on a sandwich degree, so it was a year out in industry. So I was definitely able to.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So I was able to really in that year, really able to understand what goes on in the commercial world versus the class world. And I was going, I really do. I was really enjoying that. And but, but there was still an area of me in terms of really wanting to understand the latest technology. Like that was working for an insurance company on, PL1 and, mainframe. And so
yes,
I was really curious, back to your point, I was really curious about what is the latest technology that people are trying to work out. So when I went to work for my first, I suppose, official a graduate program for Plessey Telecommunications, actually in
yeah, yeah,
Liverpool, um, they then changed to being Marconi. I said, look, I would gladly accept the opportunity to work on your graduate program, but I'd also like to still do a master's research degree.
uh-huh,
My chosen one was object technology at the time, so
wow,
object oriented design and model driven architecture and all of that was the buzzword. So they gave me day release, and I was able to travel up to Manchester every Wednesday at UMust to complete a research degree in object technology. So mixing work, but still looking at that kind of the bleeding edge technology and
yeah.
research that was going on at the time.
What a fascinating thing to do, right? To have both of those sort of strings to your bow, and also what a smart move by the employer, right? Because they're giving you that time to follow your passion, but presumably they were getting the benefit of that work.
They absolutely were, and yeah, I think the downside of that probably for both them and myself is sometimes you get to the stage of, well, maybe where my horizon is, where I want to get to now, maybe
Yeah,
they're not ready for that change yet.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so coming to the end of that research degree, I realized that there was another organization that was already kind of focusing in on that kind of new era of technology and ways of doing things. So
Yeah.
by the time I qualified, I was on the exit path to go
Yeah.
to,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you're right. There was definitely, benefits along the way for both of us. But then it was kind of, well, hey, this is what it's saying in the industry moving forward. But
Yeah.
how long are you going to be before you move into that
Yeah. Yeah.
direction?
I
So
mean,
that was an interesting. That was my first, I suppose, point of where it's saying, oh, I think I need to move on.
be somewhere else. But that, you know what, like, better for everybody that you were able to come to that viewpoint from a position of strength, I guess, and ambition rather than just being born. I mean, I would have thought the downside for someone from Liverpool was that you had to go to Manchester once a week, but I do know that Munich is a great school, and I wonder if, like, this is speculation, but as someone who has been a very senior architect, th- there's something to be learned from that understanding that the organization may not be ready for the most bleeding edge solution, right? Like, as an architect, your job is to provide the right solutions and infrastructure for the organization today and to tomorrow, which might not necessarily always be like to be right on the bleeding edge. Would that be, is that a fair observation, or am I like talking from the outside?
No, you're absolutely right. You do need to realize one around where is the technology at in terms of the adoption curve in the industry. So understanding where exactly that technology is. AI is a good example of that at the moment. So
Yeah,
looking at
yeah,
that
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of
100%.
say again.
Yeah. No, I was completely agreeing with you. I think the infrastructure and architecture for AI conversation is such an interesting one because, you know, everyone's rushing forward towards something, but the practical realities of what the organization needs today versus what we think it's going to need tomorrow require the architect to be really kind of flexible in building sustainable, growing solutions, right?
Exactly, 100%. And particularly with AI, it's very immature. There's a lot of evolution to go. So it's a case of taking those, understanding the use cases and taking those baby steps and learning. Because there's a lot of change. For the organization, a lot of change for IT, as well as a change in the industry. So it's all moving along with that, and also regulation, all moving along with that at the same
Yeah.
time. But back to your original question. Uh, I think it's it's um it's really important to understand where the technology is at in the industry, also where the organization is at, and also what's appropriate for their priorities at this stage. And getting that timing right, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
And I would say that's probably one of my failings early on in my career, is maybe missing that timing and
Hmm.
the approach to bringing in something new to an
Okay.
organization. Yeah.
Don't worry, we'll get to your failings very, very soon indeed. But I am I am I'm kind of impressed with this early part of your career because, on many levels, right? Clearly, the organisation you work for and the organisation you went to, they sound like strong and healthy organisations. So I want to understand what that transition was, but I also want to ask maybe before that, like, it feels and it sounds like you may have in this part of your career had good mentors and good leaders. I mean, can you remember a first great boss and what you learned from them in your career?
I think the boss that has really stuck with me all these years, that I always refer back to in the sense of when anyone asks that question, is probably the boss I had that um uh that was the head of IT for my first end user company, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I worked in the technology companies, the telecoms, the transport, the space kind of industries, all in tech companies, I suppose, right? System software houses. But then when I came to Ireland, that was my first venture into the end user world of the financial and investment sector.
Uh,
And the head of IT there, I remember they interviewed remotely. Actually, we were in Vancouver at the time, and they booked out this booth in KPMG's offices. We booked out a booth in downtown Vancouver because we didn't have Teams then. So
yeah,
this
yeah,
is all
yeah.
on VC. And basically, I booked out this room. It must have cost a lot of money for a couple of hours airtime. And basically, they interviewed me and got the job, and they relocated us to Ireland. So a lot of investment in us to relocate us. And my first day with him, sat down with him, and he said, what do you need to be successful in this first year of working in the company, given what I've just said to you in terms of what I want you to do? And I just says,
Yeah.
I need access to the right budget, to the right individuals. I need to have the freedom to be able to use the right approach, right technology to make this. And he goes, you will have everything that you need. And just reflecting on that, that just wasn't a day one conversation. He followed through on that. So the whole thing of empowering me and the team that I was leading to actually to follow through and see the change happening, and also to advise me how to navigate the stakeholders in the business that he's very familiar with, and to have his support as I navigate them. Certainly in those early years, and then thirdly, I think thirdly is he was also he understood the business very well. He was the head of IT, but he actually came from the business,
Right.
right, from the investments industry. So he's very well respected in the organization. He was on the top team, but he took a stint in IT. And I think I got a lot of value at the fact that he came from the business, but he
Yes.
had a passion for IT to help the business. He knew it needed IT, and he knew to rely on people that understood IT to help him,
Yeah.
and I forever grateful for the time. I was there for a good, I'd say at least 7 to 10 years. That my kind of professional growth, I think, as a real leader, came on the back of spending a lot of that time with him.
That's amazing. And it's so, again, one of the themes you often hear. I think these days we talk about servant leadership maybe, or something like that. But I remember when I was first managing a reasonable sized team, an HR person actually sort of asking me to draw the org, and obviously I did a triangle with myself at the top, and then her just turning upside down and saying, right, but as a leader, your job is exactly what you talked about, right? You will have everything you need. Also, I'm going to navigate the organization for you so you can do your job without having to kind of you step into bear traps. Or, I mean, you mentioned politics earlier, right? There's always politics in every organization, right? And a good manager, a good leader can help you like cut through those things. But I think again, another thing that's often uh, consistent in these conversations is the IT leader who's actually a business leader, right? Who cares about and is passionate about the business, but understands that the IT strategy is the business strategy as well, kind of thing. So lots of really great lessons to absorb there. But again, as we mentioned earlier, we can't let you off the hook here, David. You have already trailed the very concept of failure. And we're not only here for the good stuff, we do learn more from our mistakes. So maybe we should hit on that in our next section, David. It'd be great to understand, what's that first big mistake that, occasionally makes you wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat? Is there one of those in the wardrobe there?
I mean, certainly every project you have the micro level mistakes that you're
Yeah.
making as you move through the particular project or program of change, and you do have those sleepless nights, but that's part of being
Yes.
in IT. Um, I think when I look historically back at my career, um, I think it's back to that point of I'm very passionate about technology and about how we do it and how we do it well, but it does have to be tempered and tailored based upon how ready the organization is. And I think when I was given a big opportunity to lead a change in IT as part of a revised IT strategy, the first IT strategy refresh I was involved in one of the organizations, um, I proposed a certain methodology, component-based development back in the time before SOA, just a precursor to SOA as we just entered into SOA. And, I did all the research, very comfortable with researching and, of where I come from the engineering world and all of that. And I was like, right, this is how we should do things. And, there was a, there was a gap between where I felt that we should be going in IT versus where IT was at. And also their lack of understanding of maybe that was the right, how to get there. And the other side to that is is I probably spent too long in trying to sell that and embed that
Yes.
rather than getting the early wins with the business and
Yeah.
churning out the iterations of value over time. So so I think that was a failure. It was something I struggled with in those early years of trying to be able to. I know what we need, but
Yeah.
how do I translate it as well as getting everyone on side and getting
Yeah.
the value early and often?
Yeah. And maybe maybe actually one of the things we learn over time is that, you know, getting there may not mean actually getting right there, but like it's getting close enough to there. And actually, the quickest way to get there might be in increments. To your point, right? Like but I think a lot of very successful people, have a similar experience, which is, it's frustrating because you understand what good should look like, and we're not there yet, kind of thing. But I also think, even just from having these conversations, a lot of the times the people who become successful are the one who recognize that mistake, right? We do say here you learn more from your mistakes, and that is definitely the case, right? If you're willing to learn from
Yeah, you absolutely do, Matt. And I remember uh the dreaded annual performance reviews.
that.
Yeah. And I used to always say, what like this interview, this performance review is not helping me. This is because all you're saying is all the good things I've done. Can you at least can you say some things that I need to improve on or fine tune or whatever? And that, that was a couple of organizations that was happening in, the
Yeah,
real performance conversation, you know, you're good or you're great. Here's how you can be better, right?
yeah,
Or here's some of the things that you do need to work on.
yeah, yeah. No, very interesting. And then I think part of that is, again, I mean, you're very well educated, right? You've got your hands-on experience as well. You've got a huge amount of knowledge. But of course, in this industry, things change, and the practical applications of the technology means that things change anyway. So I don't know if there was a first time you realized something that you thought you knew might not actually be wholly correct. Has there been anything like that along the way? Any kind of um, um, uh, firm beliefs that you've had to unbelieve at certain points?
Yeah, I think there's probably one example of that around when we were bringing kind of like a service oriented architecture and business process management (BPM) at the time. We actually actually won an
Yeah,
award
very
uh,
nice.
by Oracle. Um, it's the Oracle Fusion Middleware Architects of the Year award, right?
Yeah.
And myself and my team, I was leading the architecture team at the time on that as well. And we delivered on a SOA stack and a BPM stack. Um, and I remember the SOA stack worked very well. I remember and this wasn't to do with the product itself, but I remember on the BPM side is the business sponsor who was very much behind us in the early stages says, I'm not seeing the value of this. My operations teams are not being able to find the right use cases to apply the BPM. The idea was that the business was supposed to get more ownership and develop the process models themselves and automate them as opposed to them being in IT. And that was back in 2007, 2008. So very still early stages of automation that the business themselves can empower themselves with. And it was too early for BPM.
Right.
And we end up having to back out that solution a number of years later, and simplified things for the business. And it was clear that one, the technology wasn't there yet, but secondly, the business weren't ready for that kind of automation that they could do themselves. And I saw it generally as it kind of like we had a BPM sledgehammer and we were looking for all the nuts, you know. It
Yeah.
was that
Yeah.
analogy.
Interesting. Yeah, but again, I think like the 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 successful thing here is that you were able to recognize that and learn from it, right? Because it's not the worst failing to have, um, but it's an important thing to learn, and it speaks to kind of the theme of our conversation here, which is that actually the right solution isn't always the quote unquote best gold standard solution, right? Depends on what the organization.
Exactly. I think I have probably one other example, not necessarily a failure, but actually a crossroads where
Yeah,
both the business stakeholders and the IT stakeholders realize we've now got to a stage in our journey in the organization that we now need to pivot.
right.
And I had prime example of that where I'd architected the landscape, which was heavily bespoke application development focused from an IT perspective, to one of we now need to buy off the shelf, we now need to move into the SaaS world, etc. So moving from a lot of what we've developed into a packaged kind of, we don't want to be in a software product company. We're an end user company. We can't keep up with all the R&D. Let's now make a strategic change to say we're going to simplify our landscape, and we're going to buy the industry leading packages both for our front office and for our
Yeah,
back office. And that was a big decision for me as an architect that had brought the team, and we'd had that 7 to 10 years journey on that development path to now move to, we're actually going to be phasing this out because we're moving to packaged and integrations
yeah.
solution.
Again, I think something that is a real sign of strong and successful people is, and it's something I have to learn regularly. A previous boss was very good at telling me this. Is kind of it is you have to not to get sort of polemical about things, right? Like even if you do know that this is the right thing and it's the best thing, but like it's almost that thing of, again, as a leader, sometimes you have to sell to your team something that you don't think is necessarily the best thing because it's been the thing that's decided. And I think as an individual, sometimes you have to let go of things because that's the consensus, and we're just going to go in that direction, kind of thing. It can be a tricky thing to learn. Well, amazing. Like these are very positive failings I think you've had there, David. So well done for navigating that section. Um, uh, let's take a short break from the business stuff and maybe get to, we're going to go to quick fire first, where we try to get to know you a little bit beyond your professional veneer using our patented random question generators. So could you please pick a question from number 1 to 13?
5.
Number 5 is, oh, okay, and it's perfectly fine to not have an answer for this, but could you tell us something maybe about your first car?
My first car.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. My
Good.
f- yeah, my first car was when I was in university. I used some of my grant at the time when
Yeah,
when
yeah, yeah.
you
We're
got a
aging
good grant.
ourselves here, David, but yes, I also got a grant.
I got a Mark II Ford Escort.
I'm celebrating because that was exactly the car I brought when I was
No
at
way.
University of Hull. So there you go. Yeah, mine was white with a green stripe. I'm not sure if you can compete with that.
Mine was white with the red stripe.
Oh, there you go. Amazing.
Yeah.
We could cruised around together.
Yeah, we could have.
Yeah. I think mine in the end mine did 140,000 miles, and I sold it to my dad for like a couple of hundred quid, which was just him giving me some money to move to London. But yeah, what a
I
car!
wonder how much it'd be worth now.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I think this particular one not that much because in those 140,000 miles, I'd really ridden the clutch quite hard. But yeah, no, if you, it's funny actually. I now drive. This is not a boast. I now drive a 19-year-old Ford Focus, and my brother-in-law collects classic cars, and I keep telling him in 1 year's time, my terrible Ford Focus is a 50-year classic car, and it makes him cross. Oh, go on then. Let's go for one more of our fun questions. Again, a number between 1 and 13 that isn't 5.
I'll go for 13.
13. Why not? I'm looking for something. That is. Can you tell us something about the first holiday you remember?
First holiday. Um, well, actually, first, well, certainly, a holiday for us, like when we were growing up, for example, we couldn't afford to
Yeah.
go abroad, whatever abroad meant, and planes were expensive and all of
Yeah.
that, flying. Um, uh, Going to Wales from
There
Liverpool,
you go.
going to Wales to with my family. Yeah, that was a really, and that that was very modest. But we had a great time, and I typical Liverpool fashion. I saw a um, a lamppost, a wooden lamppost, and I carved my initials on the lamppost,
Leaving your
as you
mark on the
do.
universe. Yeah.
I was, DJ was here, whatever the year was, and I remember going back there years later and seeing that it was still there.
Yeah.
I was-
Amazing.
now
Yeah.
I left all that graffiti behind me, Matt,
Yeah.
much years later.
I think the statute of limitations has probably. No, it's funny. I grew up in Leeds, West Yorkshire, and yeah, we used to go to the coast, to the east coast, for our holidays when I was a kid. And I definitely, I was away with my family recently, and sort of reminiscing, my wife and I, that I hadn't been on a plane until I was like in my late teens, kind of thing, and that was like an organized church trip thing. Whereas like my kids, they're so blasé about about all of these things. It's just,
Yeah.
which is progress, and it's what we want for our families. But
But I think, Matt, the thing that I really learned from that was, one, it gave me the passion for the outdoor life.
uh-huh.
Simple holidays,
Yeah,
spending time in a modest way with your family,
yeah,
enjoying the beach, enjoying the hills, the mountains, etc. Um, and and kind of you're kind of doing that with very little income, and then when you do go away, you kind of you're going away for a different experience then, right? And
yeah.
you kind of and you kind of you can kind of value that for what that is.
Absolutely.
Um, I spend a lot of my times in Ireland, in the countryside,
Yeah,
at the beaches and the sea, swimming, hiking. I'd love to travel, but I always go back to that.
yeah. It sounds amazing, to be honest with you. That's the other thing my kids are blasé about, actually, like growing up on a council estate. And we're fortunate enough to live in a semi-rural place, and the occasional deer hops through the garden, or even just seeing a fox or a badger, and my kids are kind of like, yeah, back to the screens, kind of thing. Whereas I'm like, for goodness sake, this is
Yeah.
nature. This is yeah, that sounds amazing.
Matt, I think we could have lived I think we could have lived in the same family at some point, you know?
It feels very similar, doesn't it? Okay, let's move on to our final section. You'll be very relieved to know, David, which is we call first and final thoughts. So, and I'm looking forward to this because you're a very successful person, but also just from this conversation, it's clear you've got a lot to offer. So, what would be the first piece of advice you would give to someone who was just starting out?
Um, well, very first, I wouldn't sweat about, you know, getting into a career.
Yeah.
That's the very first thing. Um, Even though I was driven, some people would mistaken that to being ambitious, and I wasn't ambitious. I was driven to want to be able to get the experience of using the technology and collaborating and working with people. I just love, I'm very open and honest, as I said, but I just love working with people, solving problems, using technology. If you focus in on that,
Hmm.
the career, the compensation, the rewards look after themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the first thing I would say. Secondly, is I had the fortunate thing of moving around companies because I was following where that experience was taking me,
Hmm.
as opposed to the next career move. It was more of the experience move. And actually, not deliberately, but realizing as I'm going from one industry to a different industry to a different company, I was also learning a lot about those industries and those ways of doing things, the cultures, the company themselves, the countries that I actually worked in as well. So try to diversify as much as you can across companies, across industries, and even countries. As much as you can, as opposed to you and I growing up, Matt, is get in the banks and,
Totally.
if you go in the bank for life, you know.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, very much so. My parents were, classic sort of working class boomers. Like, my mum was a teacher, my dad worked for the NHS for 40 years, kind of thing. And it was you got in and you stayed there. And I completely agree. In my world, in media and publishing, we've been in an industrial revolution for 25 years, right? And like the people who succeed, thrive, prosper are open to the different experience. And so, however you get it, and actually, I've worked for the same organization for a long time, but it's never been the same, right? It's been different roles, it's
Yep.
been challenges, different skills. I think that's excellent advice to give people. And it's funny, you're not the first person to say your first piece, which is like, you know, don't think about the staging post, the material gains, all of those things. Like follow the thing that you're passionate about, the thing that you're interested about. For me, it's been always learn, right? As long as you're kind of learning something, then it feels like you're kind of, and it's fine to do a transactional job and it's fine to do it, but like I think if you've got that passion, then that's the thing that's going to lead to contentedness and
You're 100% right, Matt. The final thing I would say is, and it was something I reflected on in an interview. I went for an interview for, it was actually for the combined CIO chief architecture role, so a bit schizophrenic in one of the
yeah,
companies. And the global CIO and the global HR director was in there and says, "What is the one thing that you would really you'd remember leaving behind in this organization in a number of years' time?" And I said, "It's not the technology." I said, "or the solutions or what we've achieved. It's the people.
mhm,
It's the people that I've led and developed and have been successful in their own right and have gone on to do their thing, right?
yeah,
It's ultimately the people for me. And if you ever talk to people that I've led or been or worked with in the functions I've run, is it's about the people, and they don't understand that.
yeah.
It is all about the people.
That's amazing. Well, David, I just want to thank you because this has been an excellent conversation, and we've covered so many topics. And I feel like we could talk for several hours longer. Maybe we'll have to go on a walking holiday at some point to consider that.
I'd love
But
to see that, folks.
but my thanks to you, David Jones, and thanks for watching and listening to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their first. I think you'll agree that David has been extremely interesting. I've been your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you are an interesting person in IT, let us know, and you might be the next First Person. Thank you very much, and goodbye.